Hey, Jennifer.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Not bad. I'm awake and everything.
Oh, good. Yeah, thanks for coming into the office early to do this.
No problem.
Yeah, so I should say that this is Jennifer Ouellette, who writes a science blog called, well, it used to be called Twisted Physics, right?
No, it's always been called Cocktail Party Physics. Twisted Physics is just...
That's just the address.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. When I was starting blogging, I didn't quite understand how these things were going to show up, and I probably should have just used Cocktail Party Physics all across the board.
It doesn't really matter. Cocktail Party Physics is a great title. Where does it come from? I mean, people I'm sure have seen this, or many of our listeners will have, but you actually include down the left-hand column, along with the usual blog kind of stuff, physics cocktails.
Yes, I do.
The perfect nightcap after a long day of struggling with QED equations.
Right, and I should warn you, some of those are pretty lethal. They're very strong cocktails.
Really? And
a couple people have written in and said, yeah, I actually don't remember last night.
Oh, boy. And you shouldn't smoke when you drink them.
Well, not around the flaming ones, no, I wouldn't advise it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But the name Cocktail Party Physics, it's kind of a pejorative term a lot of times in physics. This is sort of, light, fluffy, not real science at all. But I kind of wanted to reclaim that.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a place for that kind of discussion in terms of, getting more common people outside of the physics community proper talking about physics.
Yeah, right.
It makes them a little more comfortable talking about it if you just include it as part of the culture as a whole, rather than something kind of scary and separate, like, well, now I'm going to read about physics.
Yeah. So that kind of, I've noticed that there are these science salons now they have in large cities that sort of have a similar theme, where there's one in New York City that I kept getting emails from that my friend Dorian Devins set up, and they all retreat to some basement club type atmosphere and drink, probably some of these very cocktails, and then have scientists come and talk about something.
Yeah, they're Café Scientifique, I think is what it's
That's
called.
the one, yeah.
They have them in various cities.
Yeah.
I would like to see one in downtown L.A. because there's a great bar here called the Edison that is essentially an old factory with lots of old electronic equipment, like generators and things.
Oh, that would be great.
They left it intact. It's in a basement. It's great lighting. And,
that would be perfect. They
have a version of the Edison cocktail. On my site, I have the combustible Edison, which is the one you set on fire.
Oh, okay.
There are some liability issues, obviously, in a bar setting, so they don't do that. But they do have the Edison, and it's served the extra is served in a little empty light bulb.
Really? That's great.
Yeah, it's very, very clever.
When you could bring in Tesla coils and Von de Graaff generators.
There's a Tesla coil there.
There's a Tesla coil.
They do. And they also have Tesla fries, which are, you can get Edison fries or Tesla fries.
Wow.
Yeah, one is just regular fries and one is with, the sweet potato fries.
Well, this is the perfect locale.
It would be great.
I'm actually in the market for a Tesla coil myself.
Yeah.
I noticed you wrote... I guess that was in your book. I should mention, too, that you've written two books, which I refer to as the Blue Book and the Red Book.
Yeah, and that was Penguin's point, I think, in doing it that way.
Yeah, I'll sit here. I'm sure you're too modest to have brought them in. I will hold them up. Here's the Blue Book.
I did not bring them in, you're right. It occurred to me.
That's very admirable. The Blue Book is the one that I've been reading, and I have not yet cracked the Red Book, The Physics of Buffyverse. Mm-hmm. I love the cover.
With the big vampire head on
Black
it.
Bodies and Quantum Cats. So it's an interesting book. It's really a collection of essays, and it struck me that the essays are very similar to the postings on your Cocktail Party Physics blog.
Yeah, I think I go into a little bit more. I break down the science a bit more in the Black Bodies book because it was intended for publication, and we really wanted the book to appeal to former English majors like myself.
Yeah, so that's how you got into this. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and I came in from English and journalism and just a whole hodgepodge of liberal arts.
And there are a lot of us like that. And it's not that we're not interested in science. We're very interested.
Yeah.
But there aren't always a lot of books for those sorts of people. I mean,
yeah, and I always figure, I guess most of my colleagues at the Times did not come from a science background. There's a few exceptions, like Ken Chang, who I think you know.
Yeah, I know Ken really well.
Yeah, and Jim Glanz, who's in Iraq now. And,
right.
And in the old days, Malcolm Brown had a degree in chemistry, although he really cut his teeth as a reporter in Vietnam. But I always think that, you know, it's an advantage in some ways not being a scientist when you're writing about science, because we're really on the same side as the reader, and we're sort of representing them to the scientific world, and vice versa.
Right. It's kind of being between a rock and a hard place sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
Because, I mean, I've talked to a lot of people, and the science in black bodies and quantum cats is fine as far as it goes, but it's very simple. And while I was writing it, I was afraid it was too simple, but when I ran it by test readers, you know, people with master's degrees who spoke several languages, they really said, you know, you could make this even simpler.
Yeah. No, that's true. It's like you always have two people reading over your shoulder.
Right,
you know,
the scientist and then the layperson.
Yeah, and the scientists
and never the
are
twain
always,
shall meet.
well, that's not quite the right nuance here, and
Right.
and then you have the layperson who wants it simpler and more metaphorical.
Right. And ultimately, I think I tend to, particularly in the books, I side with the layperson.
Yeah, I think you strike a good balance, and I was going to say that just picking up the book cold and reading it, my impression would be that, one, you have an amazingly wide range of scientific interest and ability to write about just a whole variety of subjects. And a lot of this is history of science, which I just love. And
Right.
like your first chapter is Renaissance Man on the publication of De Divina Proportione. And then before long, we're getting into the invention of the microscope. And, before that, Copernicus and De Revolutionibus. And, you know, on up through more modern times, like with Faraday and Babbage, and then even Tesla.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always been fascinated by Tesla.
Tesla's a really interesting person because, you know, especially towards the end of his life, he really was a little crazy.
Oh,
but
yeah, I think he was. I think he started out pretty crazy, actually.
Yeah.
And there's this whole Tesla cult, too.
Right, no, there really is. But I admire Tesla. There's just something about Tesla that you can't help, you know, glomming onto. I mean, there's just something very likable about him as a historical character.
Yeah, and there's, I guess we should say a little bit about Tesla, that he's credited with, if not inventing, at least developing the idea of alternating current electricity.
Right. And, I mean, he got kind of screwed over because obviously alternating current won out in the so-called current wars, and Westinghouse made a fortune, but Tesla signed away his patent rights.
Yeah, he signed away his patents. Yeah,
and he died impoverished. And he pretty much did it because he wanted to give electricity to the world. And that is a form of insanity in today's capitalist society.
Well, and he also had these ideas, I guess toward the end of his life, he was trying to figure out ways to transmit electrical energy wirelessly.
Right.
You know, without hitting birds and airplanes and things and electrocuting them. And that's sort of where all these conspiracy theories started arising,
Right.
that J.P. Morgan and all these people
Right. He
conspired
clearly
to
had
undermine
obsessive compulsive disorder from day one. And it's very clear that he lapsed into severe paranoia towards the end of his life.
Right. But, and I was really glad you wrote about, this is one of my favorite stories about the current wars where Thomas Edison was promoting direct current, which is like with a flashlight, and Westinghouse was promoting alternate current, which is what we have today. And the disadvantage of direct current is that you can't use a transformer to step it up to really high voltages and tiny currents and send it over large distances. So if people were like, 10 blocks from the old Pearl Street Edison station in Manhattan, their lights would be dimmer than the people that were just 1 block away, and there's no way to boost the power.
Right.
And,
in that sense, Westinghouse, I think, was the more far-reaching thinker.
Yeah, because
rare, because Edison was obviously very good about figuring out what would go in the market. I think in this case, he had a real blind spot.
Yeah, and Edison too. I think Tesla came to kind of disdain him because Tesla believed in figuring out problems from basics. Well, the famous thing about Edison is he tried, so many 100 or 1,000 different things for the light bulb filament until he just happened to find one that works.
Right.
But and then in this current war, well, you wrote about the electric chair.
Right.
Yeah, remind me how that fit in.
Well, the electric chair was something that had been developed, but Edison kind of did this great bit of I don't know, I guess you'd call it spin.
Yeah, that's right.
Karl Rove would have been so proud.
Uh-huh.
He basically was trying to prove that alternating current was too dangerous.
Yeah.
So they specifically used alternating current in the electric chair and then would perform these demonstrations. Initially, they used to just electrocute animals, and there actually was a problem around Edison's lab
Right.
in Menlo Park, sort of dogs and cats sort of mysteriously disappearing every now and then. And they would be like, quote-unquote, Westinghoused.
Right, yeah, Westinghouse.
But the very
right.
first execution by electric chair was done using alternating current, and Edison tried to use that to tell people that AC was unsafe.
So he'd advertise that Westinghouse's electricity is so unsafe they use it to kill murderers at Sig Sig.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a strong selling point. That's all the public hears.
Sure. Well, it's just a great story. And then how Tesla goes on at the Chicago Exposition to demonstrate that he could in fact run 1,000,000 volts of alternating current through his body if he keeps the current low enough so that it doesn't cause any damage, cellular damage, and the frequency high enough that his nervous system can't register it, so he doesn't even feel it. So
right.
These
That I
voltages
think
go
was the most
crackling.
amazing thing about Tesla was that he had this very intuitive, loving, almost relationship with electricity. He kind of really understood it.
It just brings out the mystery. I mean, it's still mysterious. We just sort of pretend to understand it.
Yeah, there are
just to describe it.
certain of his little tricks, his little optical illusions and things that people haven't quite figured out. You know, they think they know kind of what he was doing, but they can't quite get it as perfectly as he did.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's this whole kind of subculture now of, well, first there's kind of the Tesla cultists who kind of tend to get into this conspiracy theory where Tesla had a means of solving all the world's energy problems, but then the conspiracy dragged him down. But then you have some more serious kind of amateur experimenters that are really into experimenting with high voltage, high frequency electricity, and they have all these interesting web pages.
Well, you know, I love Tesla coils, and there actually are, there was a couple of grad students who made a singing Tesla coil, essentially, where they actually kind of created a bizarre kind of music out of, they converted the frequencies into sound, and then they created this kind of bizarre kind of music.
Yeah.
But even the wireless energy thing, I mean, I was at the Industrial Physics Forum last fall, and they actually think they may have cracked this. I mean, they're not... They can actually find a way where you don't get the massive energy losses, and it can actually be a viable way to power your laptop or your cell phone from across the room wirelessly.
Really? Wow.
They're not quite ready, and it might just only work for things like cell phones, but considering how often we all forget to plug in our cell phones, that's probably sufficient. We won't be saving the world, but maybe we could be making our lives a little easier.
Yeah, and it really is one of the big constraints are these batteries. And they're so heavy, and they... You know, it's just the one thing that's really kept the technology from just...
Well, the reason my laptop is as big as it is not just the screen, but the fact that the battery takes up so
Yeah,
much
I know.
room.
Yeah, it would be so great if we could just pull this out of the air. Well, we might be able to do it with cold fusion, which I noticed that you've written about in your most recent posting.
Yeah, you know, I thought for a moment before writing about it, because I really just kind of wanted to talk about, you know, the media coverage and the kind of story that's how the story has changed over the years.
Yeah.
I mean, way back when it first came out, it was like this big scandal. There were accusations of fraud. And all of a sudden, over the last 20 years, they've been transformed into these underdog heroes, you know, fighting the scientific establishment.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the minute you put any kind of cold fusion criticism out there, you know, the zealots and the crackpots just can't let it go.
Yeah, it's a little like the Tesla people.
A little bit. I think the Tesla people are more sane.
Wow.
I get along fine with the Tesla crowd.
What was the occasion to write this? That piece in Wired?
Yeah, there was a piece in Wired, and I almost never, if anyone's read my blog, I almost never cover cold fusion, just because I think it's been done and it's not all that interesting to me, and I don't think it's going to turn out to be, you know, the most interesting science. There might be something interesting there.
Yeah.
The jury is very much still out on that.
Well, it's been almost 20 years.
Right, right. But the Wired piece, I thought, you know, if you want to paint them as these heroes, great, but at least acknowledge that there's another story.
Yeah.
You know, and that's really all I was trying to say, and then I provided the alternate story, saying this is what it used to be.
Right,
So.
right. I remember when I first, I was working at the Times then, and I specifically remember, it's like remembering where you were when John F. Kennedy was shot. You know, I remember where I was when cold fusion was announced, and I was riding a train from Manhattan to Providence, Rhode Island, to interview some people at Brown University, and I was reading the Times, and I just pulled out the old story here to see what it said, but see, it was 1989, right? Mm-hmm. Fusion in a jar. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, March 24th, 1989, and it was by the aforementioned Malcolm W. Brown.
Right, and Malcolm Brown also wrote later on, in November of that year, he wrote the seminal, paper of record article on the debunking.
Yeah, and I noticed how skeptical he was. I mean, the lead here says, a professor at the University of Utah said yesterday that he and a British colleague had achieved nuclear fusion in a test cell simple enough to be built in a small chemistry laboratory. But then immediately says the achievement, if verified, would represent a gigantic advance in generation of nuclear energy, but experts elsewhere were skeptical.
Yeah, it's funny, I remember that was actually, I was just starting out as a science writer when that story hit. So I didn't quite understand, what was going on. It was a really good, it was a very, very good introduction to me into the scientific process of peer review. I mean, because all of those elements are there. If you want to know how science works and how it can go wrong, that's the perfect story for that.
Oh, and it was such a romantic idea, too, that after all this time and all these experiments, that something like this could still be discovered, and that you could do a tabletop experiment.
It's a tantalizing story. It's a tantalizing possibility.
You
do want to believe it.
Oh, I know. It would have been... it would have just changed everything.
And at the time, of course, I was very innocent and naive about how science works, and I think that I fell into the why are the scientists being so mean to them, and did not understand what was going on and what the culture was and why what they did, how they handled it was so poorly done. There's a whole lot of elements there that I didn't even begin to understand. But it's not necessarily true that it was debunked right away. People were skeptical, but they were also very excited.
Oh, yeah, and you were
Sean was at Harvard at the time, and he said everybody was just thrilled. I mean, everybody couldn't wait to do the experiments to test it.
Yeah,
so.
it really, and they got some what seemed like replications too, but I mean, they always turned out not to really hold up, if I recall.
It's funny because I've talked to several scientists about cold fusion on both sides of the fence. And even people like Peter Hagelstein will even admit that...
Who's Peter Hagelstein?
He's a scientist at MIT, very, very promising young physicist who chose to go into cold fusion and really has suffered professionally because of it. You can debate unfairness or not. He really has suffered. On the other hand, he chose a rather quirky field, and that raises questions. But even he will say, he does very, very good experiments from what I understand, but even he says that they're incredibly inconsistent. I think I cite in the Post, he's actually, as of 2004, he said that he had spent like 50,000 experiment hours and he had registered maybe 50 occasions of what he considered to be unmistakable signs of excess heat, and other scientists would dispute that. Yeah,
I guess, would you say the mainstream view is that, well, maybe something, some interesting is going on here that, is going to result in a minor footnote, but it's not going to be nuclear fusion of any sort.
Right. I think there's... my feeling, based on what the scientists I've spoken to and the DOE panel report, is that there might be something of interest going on here, but it's not developed enough to justify a federal funding program, and that's really the issue, is the funding.
How you divide up the money.
For a long time, cold fusion has kind of run on the hype on this wonderful energy source, and they've gotten a lot of corporate funding. Japan, for a very long time, funded them. That's all been kind of drying up over the last few years. So it's interesting that we're seeing these kinds of articles right about the time they're desperate for funding, I think.
Well, of course, that's how it works in all fields.
It's how the world works.
Yeah, recently I was at... Also, anyway, we're back.
What were you saying? You said something you remembered one time, and then I forgot. I didn't hear it.
One time, Let's see. It's lost, but it probably wasn't important.
Okay.
I was just looking at on your website. You have a picture of this very mysterious-looking glowing jar with wires coming out of it.
Oh, right.
Is that a cold fusion experiment?
That's a cold fusion experiment. Yeah,
Wow.
and that's actually from one of the cold fusion labs.
Oh.
So it's not like I made that up.
Yeah, I was wondering if it was so. So there's something producing light.
Right. I mean, I think it's very understandable that there's something strange going
Yeah.
on, but there may be other explanations.
I imagine. Yeah, it's not.
Yeah.
But it's
It
really
looks
a great
really
picture.
cool. I mean, you can kind of
Yeah.
see why people get drawn in.
Yeah,
you
it
know?
definitely kind of captures that whole sense of mystery. It's it's the same kind of mystery I think that the early electrical pioneers must have felt, like Michael Faraday, and when he first realized that you could wind a coil on one side of an iron ring and another coil on the other, and you could energize one coil, and electromagnetic waves would induce a current in the adjoining coil with absolutely no obvious electrical connection.
Right.
That just must have seemed so totally mysterious. Or when Oersted ran the current through the wire and saw the compass needle turn.
Right. Faraday is one of my favorite scientists.
Oh, mine
and,
too.
Yeah, I mean, I just love him. For one thing, he was mathematically illiterate,
Yeah,
so I can
yeah.
kind of relate to that.
That's right.
But he was a brilliant experimentalist, and like Tesla, he had an intuitive kind of understanding of this whole electromagnetism thing that was so new at the time.
Yeah,
And,
he's fascinating.
And that was another thing where he had these theories, and they weren't quite right about how electromagnetism works, and he couldn't back it up mathematically, so he kind of faced a certain amount of skepticism in the scientific community.
Yeah.
But over time, James Maxwell came along and provided that theoretical underpinning and tuned up some of the rough edges, and you ended up with a really good working theory of an excellent working theory of electromagnetism that we still use today.
Yeah.
So
Faraday had this intuitive idea that a moving current
right.
will cause a magnetic field and a flux, or let's see, how does it go?
Right, and he had those ideas of the lines of flux, which, were almost but not quite right.
Yeah.
And Maxwell kind of, provided the theoretical underpinning and some of the rigor that the scientific community demanded.
Yeah, so Faraday, it was just like the moving current makes an electromagnetic field, and a moving electromagnetic field makes a current. So there was this interesting symmetry, and then Maxwell put it all together in Maxwell's equations. And
right, and the point being that you need both, and that it is right to be skeptical. And I think Faraday also suffered. Initially. He certainly had some mental problems later in life.
Yeah, he had a real nervous breakdown, it sounds
but
like.
that doesn't mean that the scientific process didn't work. It did.
No, yeah, I mean he was probably the most important physicist before whom? God, maybe the most important experimental physicist. And I wrote a chapter about him in this book that I just finished called The 10 Most Beautiful Experiments.
That sounds like a great book.
Yeah. Each one is my choice of what the 10 most beautiful experiments in science were, and I used Faraday's electromagnetism experiments, and also each one of these experiments is kind of an excuse just to write a little essay about this time and this person. And I was really fascinated with this relationship that he had with Lady Ada Lovelace.
Oh.
Yeah, she was like Charles
Babbage's
muse.
assistant. I wasn't aware that she also knew Faraday.
Yeah, it sounded like she was seriously pursuing him. She would send him all these really flirtatious letters, and of course he was this deeply religious man who was, apparently fighting her off. But it's an interesting correspondence. And
well, that would have been an interesting hookup, I think.
yeah. Hard to imagine. And Babbage was weird enough.
Well, I doubt very much she was actually attracted to Babbage, but, Faraday was a good-looking guy.
Yeah, I guess he was. Yeah.
He had that tall, thin, aesthetic look.
Right, yeah. He really was pretty aesthetic. And
chicks dig that. Actually, Tesla was a babe magnet. I mean,
really, Tesla?
There was a young heiress, J.P. Morgan's niece, I think, or daughter, who had a huge crush on him. It's actually how he got funding for the Woodcliff Tower that ended up not being built.
Oh. And he, that would fit in. Yeah, that fits in with the conspiracy theory. And then J.P. Morgan pulled out the funding at the end because
he rejected his daughter.
Yeah, right.
Or his niece.
Well, it's also like all these people that are conspiring to keep internal combustion engines that run on tiny fractions of the same amount of gasoline, and electric cars and solar cars. And
I do love my Prius, though. I like my hybrid.
You actually have a Prius, huh?
I do.
Oh, well, good. My brother has one. He loves it.
And it's I've become completely obsessive, because it trains you basically into good driving habits that maximize fuel efficiency.
Oh,
and it's like a little video game where you can see your mileage, and you never want it to get below a certain point. You hate going up hills and having to accelerate really fast, but it just ruins your mileage.
Yeah, I've been thinking recently that real help of a real way to reduce energy consumption nationwide would be if people were just trained in the most rudimentary physics.
Right.
So they realize that
and I think
acceleration takes energy, but not
a lot.
not just maintaining the speed. I mean, just takes a little because of friction.
And people don't really understand how much energy. They don't really understand, how we measure energy and what the units actually mean.
Yeah.
That's why whenever I talk about energy with the capital E in terms of a physics sense, the Prius is very useful, but so are things like treadmills.
Yeah.
I read a story about this one gym that was actually hooking up light bulbs to the machine so that people could see just how hard they had to work to power a simple light bulb.
Yeah, yeah.
When we're talking energy, we're talking a lot of energy.
Yeah, yeah. So they hook a dynamo up to the exercycle.
Right, and it's actually extremely difficult working, just powering away your little stationary bike as fast as you can, and you can barely keep that light bulb lit. It's very sobering to realize what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's a great way to get an intuitive feel for energy.
Right. And the Prius, I think, does that for gasoline, for exactly how much it takes.
So you have this really advanced kind of digital display with...
Right.
Yeah, that would be good.
It shows you which engine's kicked in. It shows you when you're charging the battery.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so you get some visual feedback.
It shows you how much, kilowatts you've recouped, by coasting downhill.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
Because, I never really thought about this, but it's perfectly obvious. A commenter on my blog pointed it out. The turning wheels are a generator, and if you can just tap into that and feed it back into the battery, it's a nice design.
Yeah, they sound great. I have a... I'm not exactly a gas guzzler, but I have a 15-year-old Jeep. So the dilemma for me is if I got rid of the Jeep and bought a Prius, although I would save energy when I was driving the Prius, I would be consuming the huge amount of energy that it takes to forge the steel and make the car in the first place, when I already have a perfectly good car that's getting 15 miles to the gallon. So I've decided the responsible thing to do is to drive it into the ground.
Yeah, it's a personal choice. John's Corolla just died, so we bought a little convertible, and now he's got the little gas guzzler.
Yeah, yeah, but if your car dies, then that's
right.
He
drove it into the ground.
Yeah.
So.
I remember living in New York City and not having a car. God, that was.
I haven't. This is the first time I've owned a car in 20 years.
Oh well, then you're really doing talk about a tiny little energy footprint. That's
well, I lived in D.C. and I ran a lot. During the winters, I ran the heat quite a bit. So,
yeah, but
6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
I think you're probably ahead of most of us. What else have you been writing about? There was another one I wanted to specifically ask you about, the Oobleck.
Yeah, the gooey stuff.
Yeah, Bartholomew and the Oobleck. That brings back memories.
It's a great story.
Yeah, Dr. Seuss.
Yeah, it's an old Dr. Seuss story. It was one of the few things he wrote in prose. When I was a kid, I found it in the library and just thought it was the greatest thing ever.
Oh yeah.
Green gooey rain.
Yeah. and then you use Bartholomew and the Oobleck to write this really nice essay about the difference between Newtonian and non-Newtonian fluids. And it's something I've never even thought about. And could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's interesting. I'm very interested in phase transitions. I like materials physics a great deal. I'm very much into hands-on kind of experimental science.
Tell us a little bit about what a phase transition is.
It's basically what happens when a material changes from a liquid to a solid to a gas.
Oh, water
Dry
freezing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Basically, you hit this critical temperature pressure point, and then the molecules move more freely in a gas. They solidify a bit more, in a liquid so that they can still kind of flow, but there's a little more solid aspect to them. And then, of course, in a crystal, they're very firmly entrenched in sort of this lattice structure.
Yeah.
And that's a nice little neat way. It's an example of lying to children kind of science. It's how we learn it in basic science class. But there's all of these materials that don't quite fit any of those neat little categories.
Uh-huh.
When Newton described a fluid way back in the 1600s, early 1700s, he was talking about an ideal fluid. He was talking about something like water, which has has a very specific level of viscosity and other properties. Something like ketchup, something like Oobleck.
Yeah.
Any kind of gooey, kind of gel-like substance is kind of somewhere between a liquid and a solid.
Yeah, so now a Newtonian liquid, then when you apply what you call a shearing force, like if you're stirring it, the viscosity doesn't change.
Right, but the weird thing about the non-Newtonian fluid is it does.
Yeah.
That's why hitting the ketchup bottle never makes it come out faster, because actually the force that you're applying, it responds and it actually solidifies briefly.
That's
in
amazing.
response to that.
So that little shock wave causes it to become thicker, and then you hit it harder, it becomes even thicker.
Right, and then you have those great YouTube videos of the cornstarch mixture. I mean, it's a favorite with students during spring break.
Yeah, so they mix cornstarch, and then they can walk on water, basically.
Well, it's not really walking on water, but
walking on cornstarch.
Well, and they're not. It looks like they're walking on water. I mean, obviously they are sinking a little bit into it because they're heavy. But you notice that for that brief moment, you can see it briefly solidify. That the fluid behaves differently than if you did this with regular water.
Okay.
And there was a YouTube video I think that I linked to where they actually showed them putting that kind of substance into essentially something that makes it all vibrate, that adds all these vibrations to it, and it did some really funky crap. I mean, it was it was really disturbing looking. It's fun with Oobleck, gooey stuff.
And then you tie it back into quicksand and something called lightning sand and The Princess Bride.
Right. Well,
The Princess Bride is a movie, I guess.
Right. The lightning sand, but and there've been all these accounts. Like Lawrence of Arabia actually wrote of entire vehicles being swallowed up in the Sahara Desert, and scientists have been rather skeptical of these thoughts.
Well, yeah, I was wondering if I mean, I remember you always see quicksand on the old Looney Tune cartoons from the 50s, but.
And obviously, they don't, these are movies, and so you don't really expect scientific accuracy.
Yeah, but it's interesting to know what's
But
true.
there actually has been a version of lightning sand created in the laboratory, and what I actually should have done was post the photos from that experiment, because where they basically created the same conditions that they think exist out in the Sahara Desert, and then they dropped a ping pong ball suspended on a chain, and the ball just went right through within seconds, and it shouldn't have. It should have been stopped. And it's actually a really fun. They took a sequence of photographs, and it's a really fascinating thing to look at.
Yeah.
Just a fun little experiment that they did, saying, well, I wonder if you could. And there might be something there. Obviously, it's been exaggerated, but there might be some interesting science there.
Yeah, like cold fusion.
So.
Yeah, it's so interesting about science is that there's always little things between the cracks that, I mean, like lightning in itself is not all that well understood.
Right. Last summer I actually wrote about lightning because I was supposed to go visit friends in Buenos Aires, and my flight was delayed because the plane was struck by lightning.
Wow.
I was in D.C. at the time, and we always get these flash summer electric storms.
Oh, yeah.
And obviously they're trained within the air to, they're built in such a way as to deflect it. Apparently planes get struck by lightning all the time.
Yeah, it's not that big a deal, is it?
No, but it's not something that would make us all happy. The passengers, I think, they can be told that it's not that big a deal, but still.
No, it sounds horrible, but I guess the fact that the plane isn't grounded and...
Right. The problem with ours was it was grounded. It was on the ground at the time.
But there were the rubber tires.
Yeah, but it actually did something to the computer guidance system. We needed a new plane.
So you used this as an excuse to write about lightning? And
I used it as an excuse to actually talk about the Faraday cage.
Oh, yeah. No, Faraday cage is...
That's that little they basically this mesh kind of chicken wire thing, and actually Simon Schama has done this in England. He had this great demonstration show that he used to do where he would basically, put millions of volts into this cage, this sort of suit that he would wear on stage, and he would invite people in the audience to, come in and be in it. Yeah. And as long as you don't stick a finger through the mesh, you're fine.
Yeah.
All the current goes all over the surface.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's certain rules that have to be followed, but the Faraday cage is perfectly acceptable. And so you can control electricity once you understand how it behaves.
Yeah.
And I think that that was what Tesla and Faraday and all these others understood intuitively.
Yeah. Well, I really, when I read about those people and their experiments, and, another one is, well, I think you also wrote about in Black Bodies and Quantum Cats, Crookes, with the cathode ray tubes.
Oh, right,
yeah. Yeah, where, just suddenly finding you can take this tube and, evacuate most of the air, maybe put in some kind of a gas and hook a big voltage across it and get all this weird glowing, he thought it was ectoplasm inside the tubes, that he was actually seeing ghost stuff, because he was also kind of a spiritualist.
He was involved with William James and Company.
Yeah, right, yeah. What a wonderful era that was. And
it really was. I've just finished reading a couple months ago Deborah Bloom's book on William James.
That's a good book.
It's an excellent book.
Ghost Hunters or something?
Yeah, Ghost Hunters, and I particularly like the depiction of Crookes, because for a while there he was not in fact associated with the movement because he kept falling in love with the female subjects.
Oh.
he had a soft spot for the ladies, Crookes.
Yeah. And there was all the... I recently bought a Crookes tube on eBay.
Oh, wow.
I'll hold it up here.
eBay's an amazing thing.
Oh, no, I got a Crookes tube, and now I'm going for the voltage supply. And, this is an old French Crookes tube from around 1900, and I want to try to do that. See, I mentioned in some earlier conversations with John that I'd been reenacting some of these great experiments, like the Millikan oil drop experiment.
Oh, really?
And the J.J. Thomson experiment with the cathode ray tube.
Well, I would think if you're writing a book on the great physics experiments, you would want to do that.
Yeah, I only do all of the experiments I described in from the outside looking in until I got to the last chapter, which was on Millikan, and I decided I would switch to the first person and try to convince myself that the electron really exists. So I got a Millikan and a Thomson apparatus on eBay, and all these great, high voltage power supplies, and have been having all kinds of fun with them.
Wow, we don't have space for that, but but I like old scientific apparatus.
Oh, it's beautiful, isn't it?
I was in Buenos Aires, and I was going through the antique stores, and there was this one place that was all scientific and medical instruments.
Oh, I love
from like the 1700s.
Oh, that's great.
It was gorgeous stuff, but of course, it was, even with the dollar being strong down there, it was just beyond my price.
Yeah, that stuff is, the really rare stuff.
And do I really need that huge syringe? No, I don't.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but there's some, you can get nice stuff from mid-20th century that's still pretty cool, that's a lot less expensive, but... and Crookes tubes really vary. There's some, like the real classic ones that were made by some of the great German glass blowers are very expensive.
Right.
But a lot of them you can pick up for less than $100.
Right. If I had the one piece of scientific equipment that I think right now, if I could have, and unfortunately it's a bulky thing, is a cloud chamber.
Oh yeah, Wilson cloud chamber.
Well, because I was at the Exploratorium in June, and there was a lot of great stuff there, but for some reason I just found this cloud chamber, and I'd written about it and I'd read about it, but it occurred to me that I've never actually sat down and watched it.
And actually see the tracks of the particles.
They look like little jet contrails.
Yeah.
And, it's a little embarrassing, but I just kind of stood there for 15 minutes like...
Well, you got to actually see it. I've only read about it.
Well, exactly, because then you realize that there's this wonderful, it's basically visual proof of this subatomic dance that's happening all around us, all the time, that we're not even aware of. It's like this little glimpse into this invisible world.
Yeah, and that too goes back to, J.J. Thomson's lab. And
so if anyone wants to buy me a cloud chamber, I'm sure you can get them for a song.
Oh, yeah, they're not necessarily really expensive, I don't think. Let me see if I can find you one on eBay while we talk. What do you work? Are you working on another book?
I'm kind of going through the motions of working on a book.
Yeah.
I've got a proposal floating around. I want to write something on acoustics. I've been following it for many, many years now.
Acoustics. Oh, yeah.
Right.
You used to work for the American Physical Society, right? And
Exactly. I still do some work for them. I'm a
Ah.
contributing editor for APS News.
Uh-huh.
I also do a lot of work for American Institute of Physics.
Uh-huh.
So it's nice. I've actually had a lot of association with these great scientists over the years through those affiliations.
Oh, uh-huh.
And one of the things that I did was start going to a lot of acoustics meetings. After I inadvertently wrote a piece on concert hall acoustics and realized that I was just scratching
On
the
concert hall
surface.
acoustics?
Yeah. I wrote it for Industrial Physics Magazine, and just found there was so much there just in that one aspect. And then I went to the meeting and found that there were all these great personalities doing this fantastic interdisciplinary research that was kind of combining archaeology and sound and art and all these various things.
Oh, that sounds great.
It was just right up my alley. And I don't think there's been a really good general interest popular science book on sound yet.
I can't think of one.
There's been a few little things here. There's been things on little tiny aspects of it. But just how we respond to sound, how much we're aware of it, how we use it, how we shape it. These are all things that I think would make a wonderful book.
Yeah.
Now I have to convince other people that it will make a wonderful book.
Well, yeah, that's always the hard
Right.
part. But you have a good track record now.
I have a decent track record,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, you know that writing about physics, you're not going to become J.K. Rowling.
Yeah.
But you write what you love, and that becomes your
Well,
reward.
yeah, that's the whole great thing about being a science writer. I think it just gives you this license to explore
Right.
these topics that you want to understand yourself, and then if you're lucky, you get a book out of it, or at least an article.
Right. And I just, basically, I try to write the kind of books that I myself would gravitate towards, that I would want to read.
Well, your blog, I'm not even sure it should be called a blog, because it's like, to me, so many blogs are just, someone will link to something and then make a smart aleck comment about it, and that's that's their entry.
Right.
And what you're doing, and it's very similar to what Sean Carroll is doing. It's more like little essays.
Right. I looked at a lot of blogs. I mean, the beauty of it's a blog,
Yeah.
I get that a lot from people saying, well, why do you write these full-fledged articles and you're giving it away for free? And I went, these are first drafts. I mean, if I was actually writing an article about this, I'd be a lot more careful.
Yeah, but it's still very,
Yeah, I take some care so that it's
definitely.
polished and presented reasonably well, but, you're a writer, so you know that oftentimes before something appears in print, you'll rewrite it 3 times.
Oh, yeah,
before you get it exactly
oh,
right.
sure, it's just endless iterations until you're forced to let it go.
Exactly. And so when I looked at other blogs, I thought there's a lot of people doing the short, sharp linkage posts.
Yeah.
That's an area that's a niche that's being very well met, and I don't think I could do it as well.
Yeah.
So what can I do very, very well? And, I basically thought I could do shorter, slightly versions of the essays in Black Bodies and Quantum Cats, and tie it in with everyday life, with movies, with books,
Yeah.
One time I had a bicycle accident and skinned my knee, and I talked about wound healing and artificial bandages and things like that.
That's great.
If I'd had a digital camera, I would have had pictures, but
Yeah.
I think people were very grateful that I didn't. It was gross. It was a very deep gouge on the knee, and it got a little infected, and it was gross.
Horrible. Wow.
So,
So if you're in Sean's office, then you're sitting in the Feynman desk?
I'm sitting at the Feynman desk, and I feel smarter already.
Wow. Maybe for people who didn't see my conversation with Sean, we should describe the story of how you two met.
Yeah, I had started the blog about a month into it because I didn't quite understand how blogs worked.
Now, when you started the blog, you were still at APS, American Physical Society?
Yes, I was living in Washington, D.C., and the Black Bodies book had just come out.
Oh, okay.
And my publicist said, maybe you should start a blog. And I went, okay.
Oh, yeah, that's what they always say now. Yeah.
Yeah, but I realized that I tried the Amazon one and realized that wasn't what I wanted. I wanted to do something that was fun for me. And, my books are linked there on the side. It's got a little headline that says, I have no shame. Because you've got to flog your books.
Yeah, you have to give people an opportunity to buy them.
Right. But I don't push them. I mean, I really think that, if people like the writing on the blog, they might decide they might like the books. But if they don't, that's fine.
Yeah. That's good.
The blog I do for me, and it basically turned out to be a wonderful thing. Sean saw my name quoted in a Seed article and contacted me.
An article in Seed magazine?
Yeah, in Seed magazine. It was on the sex lives of physicists. Apparently, I was the only person stupid enough to go on the record on that subject.
Oh, maybe we can link to that.
Yeah, and I did a blog post about it. It was probably in March.
Yeah.
Late February, early March when it appeared. Because I said, well, unfortunately, because I'm the only person quoted by name, it makes me seem like I'm this expert on history, physics history, which I'm not. I'm a generalist.
Yeah.
I've never made any claims to be an expert in anything.
Yeah.
So I wrote about that and made jokes about Feynman and his sex life and why, physicists are human too, and to pretend that they don't have sex is ridiculous, and we shouldn't be afraid to talk about it. On the other hand, ultimately it really is all about the science, and that's how it should be.
Yeah.
I mean, it should be like a footnote. It really shouldn't be the main thing. And I didn't necessarily agree with some of the conclusions that the writer drew, although he wrote a very entertaining article.
Yeah.
So Sean saw that, found my blog, and he emailed me just basically saying, welcome, I'm linking to you, I think you have a great blog. By the way, here's how it works. You want to link to other people and start a blog roll. And he gave me some very, very helpful suggestions that, didn't really, thanks to him and the folks at 3 Quarks Daily who also linked to me early on, I think that I got plugged in very quickly to the scientific blogosphere. Far more quickly than I thought. I mean, I just thought that my mom and some of my friends would be reading it.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
it's so interesting that there even is a science blogosphere, but...
Yeah. And I will say that I probably get far less traffic because the pieces are long and they're not those short, sharp things. So I actually do demand something of my readers.
Well, yeah. It's more like reading a short magazine piece.
Right, but there's a market for that. And ultimately the blog needs to be what you find fulfilling. And for me, it's great to kind of find these quirky little items and, briefly investigate them, and then maybe later on they might turn into a more full-fledged article or find their way into a book. It's very much a writing lab for me.
A writing lab, I like that. That's perfect.
It's where I just kind of spew out my thoughts, and, sometimes I write about cold fusion and get attacked, and sometimes I question whether nuclear power is really all that wise, and the scientists jump all over me. So,
yeah. What do you think about nuclear power? What have you written?
Oh, well, I actually caused a little bit of a ruckus with that post on that because I dared to say that I wasn't crazy about it.
That you're not?
I'm not crazy about it. I'm not against it. I think that I think we need a very broad portfolio of energy solutions. I don't think there is such a thing as the one perfect energy source. I think the nature of energy, from everything I've read so far, is that there's always a trade-off.
Yeah.
You're never going to get something for free. There's always going to be a downside
it's just
regardless.
Thermodynamics.
So you really don't want to go wholeheartedly into something like nuclear power or wind power or solar because you're going to throw off that balance.
Yeah, but,
you need the diversity. My problem with nuclear power is the waste. It's what everyone has. And my point that I was trying to make and I didn't make too well is if you're trying to sell this to the public, you must address the waste issue.
Yeah, well, that's kind of been the argument all along.
And they're getting better at it. They are working on how to recycle the waste.
Yeah.
There's people who are actually experimenting with chromium that apparently has doesn't produce as much and it has a slightly shorter half-life.
Yeah.
So I think that they should be working that problem. And then that will make nuclear energy, I think, much more palatable to the average person.
And people jumped on you for that. I mean,
they did.
Seems like a pretty reasonable...
Well, also, the people who jumped on me were people who were really gung-ho on nuclear power.
Because you can, if you write anything in favor of nuclear power, then you really get jumped on.
Well, then you get all the sandal wearers, the Birkenstock people jumping on you. Yeah, so you can't win. You might as well just say what you think.
No, I just keep thinking of, how many people were killed this month by coal power in that mining accident in Utah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that obviously, global warming being what it is, we have to find some solutions here. But I think it's dangerous to assume that nuclear power is the perfect one.
Yeah.
There's some very real issues involved.
At the same time, we keep killing all these people with the smoke from the coal plants.
Right.
There's actually a group that's trying to build another coal plant on the Navajo reservation here in New Mexico in the Four Corners area, and it's just already. There was a time 20 years ago when the air up there was just so much clear. You could look across the Grand Canyon and have a clarity that you often don't have on most days now because of these damn coal plants. So, I think in a way the environmental disaster of coal has just not been played up enough.
Right, and I don't, dispute that. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily
it's
the way
a hard
to go.
question.
The energy issue is a very serious, knotty, thorny one, and
I have two brothers-in-law who are nuclear engineers, so
yeah.
So you can imagine I've been exposed to plenty of dinner table conversations on along the lines of, the public just doesn't understand, our friend the atom, like that great.
Yeah, and that's actually what happened. I got accused of being hysterical and ignorant.
Yeah.
I went, oh, please, I've been writing about this for 20 years.
Yeah,
I know a lot of nuclear scientists. This is not hysterical. I have no problem with nuclear medicine. Not freaked out by MRI.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a very serious issue, and you cannot sweep it under the rug. If you want this to become a viable energy source, you've got to address that so the public will accept it.
Yeah, I mean, it's I don't know what the big turning point to me. I think was when one of my brothers-in-law gave me a tour of he was then at a Yankee atomic plant in New England, and a tour of the plant. We got to put on hard hats and wear the little dosimeters and everything, and then we went out to the back, and there was this huge, large swimming pool kind of thing, and we were looking down into it, and I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Oh, that's the nuclear waste from the plant." And I said, "Oh, well, the nuclear waste from what time period?" And he goes, "No, that's all the nuclear waste this plant has produced in the however many decades it's been online." Mm-hmm. And I was looking right at it, and I just kept thinking, wow, that's not when you think of how much waste a coal plant produces, just as far as pure physical size, it was really striking. And I thought, well, and I know that there's all kinds of complex arguments about this, but it made me feel a little more inclined to sympathize with the idea that you just leave the nuclear waste there, where you make it, and you don't need to transport it to Idaho.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it actually would be good for people to understand how much we're talking about.
Yeah.
But I just have that small amount that one plant produces can add up quite a bit if you made that your sole energy source.
Yeah.
And, that's a significant half-life. I mean, we're talking, 50 years?
Yeah.
So that's a lot of time. And, it's really not fear of accidents or anything like that. It's just that we really have to address this.
Yeah.
And they are doing it, which I think is great.
Yeah.
I think that we will see more nuclear power. Sean and I were debating this because he thinks that 50% would be acceptable, and I'm saying, well, I think about 25%.
Yeah.
But that's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. You can debate the percentages all you want.
Yeah.
But I think the point is I like the idea of diversity. We should not be so dependent on oil, on coal, on any of that sort of thing. We should have a diverse portfolio so we don't get all one kind of pollution that destroys the ecosystem.
Yeah. Yeah, different kinds of pollution. And then there's been all these
nature thrives on diversity, and I think we can learn from her in that respect.
Well, there's been some interesting articles recently. And you see that Stanley Fish had a column in the Times about wind energy.
Oh,
and he's apparently part of a group of local citizens in some upstate New York town where he has a summer house, and they're fighting fighting a wind power plant, and
they're loud.
Yeah.
I mean, people don't realize how loud they are.
Yeah. So that's interesting.
And that's what I meant about the trade-offs. There is no perfect energy.
Yeah.
Every single energy source is going to have some aspect that's going to really annoy people.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's basically another instantiation of the second law of thermodynamics. So.
Right.
It's always going to be waste and entropy.
The great physics killjoy, as I like to call it.
Yeah, it's a great
ruins everything.
Killjoy.
Stupid entropy.
One thing I really like in the Blue Book, and I haven't cracked Buffyverse yet, but I mean, you must watch an awful lot of television.
I can see where you might get that impression. But, ironically, for a long time, I lived in New York for 14 years, and half that time I didn't even own a TV.
Yeah, I didn't really.
If anything, I read a lot. I mean, I
really like the popular cultural references.
Right, but, I am aware of the pop culture, and I have seen a few episodes of everything.
Yeah.
There's really only a few shows that I follow, and I don't stress out if I miss a lot. Especially this last year, I've been traveling so much, I haven't watched any TV at all.
Yeah.
Sean can attest, we're living together now, that the TV almost never gets turned on.
Yeah. Yeah, there's usually one or two shows that, in any one time in my life, that I that I
I
sort
don't
of
think you
follow.
can escape it, and I don't actually think you should cut yourself off from popular culture.
Yeah, I really like the stuff that's so bad that it's good is, what
and actually, there are some really nice shows out there. I mean, I don't expect them to be Shakespeare, but Shakespeare was popular culture in his time.
Yeah.
So there's some very nice stuff on TV. There's some good movies out there. I think it's great that more and more scientists are using these movie and film and TV references to talk about their science. They can say, well, yeah, that really wouldn't work, and here's why.
Yeah.
So it's a nice way to get people talking about science.
Yeah, so kind of like Lawrence Krauss did with the physics of Star Trek, and then you could see...
Which I love.
Yeah.
He was a real pioneer in that sense.
And so in your Red book, this is a good entree to
the
that.
Red book.
Yeah, in the physics of Buffyverse, this is based on the show Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which I've seen a couple of times, and I almost downloaded the pilot last night just to do some homework before I talked to you.
The pilot isn't the best one.
Yeah, I didn't get around to that, but so
generally what happens is people catch one episode and it's one of the not so good episodes, and they write off the whole series.
Yeah,
so.
It wasn't very science-y or pseudo-science-y, the one that I saw,
no.
I guess, are the ones that I saw. So what was it that led you to do the Buffyverse book, or what do you try to do in the book?
Well, it's actually very funny, because I think that a lot of people just assume they're just, it's vampires and a little blonde girl and, this sort of thing, and there can't possibly be any physics in there. And I think that that's dismissing it a little too easily.
Yeah.
There was a great quote that I actually quoted in the book. I was trolling around on some of the news groups and the discussion boards for Buffy, looking for references to physics. And I actually found a commenter who basically said, yeah, there was a book called The Physics of Star Trek, but I don't think there's ever going to be a book on the physics of the Buffyverse. So never say never.
So someone had thrown down the gauntlet.
I took the challenge. I picked up the gauntlet. I was like, fine, I'll show you. But it actually started because for the Black Bodies book, I was looking for these little references as segues into the science. And I found several. In the Buffyverse, in various episodes of Buffy and Angel.
Yeah.
Angel, in particular, had a couple of episodes that were entirely physics-centric, one on stopping time and one on string theory and supersymmetry, which are probably two of the most difficult topics you can tackle, and probably the string theory one in particular was a really dense chapter, and if anyone gets through that who's a layperson, I applaud them for it. But... and I found that I could actually find an example in the Buffyverse for just about every topic that I was covering. So I thought, you could almost write a whole book about this.
Wow. What's an example?
Well, there's certain things I call found physics. They use strange weapons. That there's a group called the Initiative, and they use like night vision goggles and tasers for electricity. They actually do electroshock kind of stuff. So it's a way to talk about what electricity can do and what it can't, and that sort of thing. Some of the monsters are very interesting. I talked a little bit about night vision, about how light behaves, why it's absurd that vampires don't have a reflection, and yet for some reason they show up on camera. Which is actually a running joke in the series, because they know it's absurd. So we can't explain it. Yeah. It's just more convenient.
It just is.
There's a lot of instances of bizarre things happening with time. That's a very common trope in science fiction, where you have that time loop. The X-Files had one where there was just, you keep repeating that same little time loop over and over again until you find a way to break the pattern. Yeah. There's several instances of that in the Buffyverse. You actually had a reference to quantum mechanics in one of the season 1 episodes. It was more metaphorical, but it was kind of having fun with the whole uncertainty principle. So I kind of use that as a segue into quantum mechanics.
Okay.
And then they have alternate dimensions. And portals, wormholes, and things like that. So, that's pure science fiction. So there was a lot there. The most difficult, and the martial arts. I had a whole chapter there on the physics of martial arts. And I do jiu-jitsu, so I was able at CUNY in New York City to actually put on a lecture and demo. I brought in people from my old Brooklyn dojo, and they reenacted the moves from the front. I would show clips from the show. I would demonstrate how a hip throw really works, and then they would run through a technique that kind of mimicked what was happening on the show to see how it would look in real life.
So you'd explain the Newtonian physics behind
right, and the point being that gravity is different in Hollywood. So, you know, they jump into it a little bit more, you know, and you get this nice, pretty spiral, and it doesn't always work that way in the real world. But
also, modifications of gravity, isn't that something that Sean's working on?
Yeah, I didn't really cover any of that. It's funny because I really wish I had known him while I was writing the book, because I think that a couple of the weaker chapters on cosmology and stuff would have been a little bit better if I'd had him there as a reference.
Yeah, because he's been trying to explain the accelerating universe, possibly in terms of...
and he's also great when I you know, about sloppy thinking and about that sort of thing. He'll say, well, you know, you really can't say this unless you find a way to actually do, you know, tie this in as well, and you need to... He's very, very helpful that way. He's a careful reader. Yeah. So I very much appreciate that aspect.
Have you gotten married yet?
We are getting married September 29th.
September...
Yeah. 29th.
29th, oh.
Yeah, in a few weeks, actually.
Oh, well, wonderful. That's wonderful.
So, the other thing in the Buffyverse book that was really problematic for some people was the magic.
The magic, yeah.
And I handled that in a very specific way.
Yeah.
I basically said, well, yes, it's magic and there is no magic, but they have a very specific kind of energy that is magical energy, but they have rules, and they have their own version of magical thermodynamics, and so I use that to draw parallels between
magical
the two.
Thermodynamics.
Right, and sometimes they violate their own rules, and that's actually where a lot of the plot twists come from. So
that's great. I mean, it must have been really interesting to kind of deconstruct the show at that level.
It was a lot of fun to write, and I've now got Sean watching Buffy. So. He's only just finished season 2, so
that's great. Well, I'm tempted to try.
So people either love the show or they hate it, and that's fine. It's not. There's very rarely people who just kind of feel so about it.
Yeah.
You know, either they feel they need to dismiss it out of hand, or they love it.
Yeah.
So.
You know, since when we dropped the telephone call, I lost track of time.
Oh.
So is your little time clock...
it says 11:04.
11:04. So we've been talking a little over an hour?
I think so, yeah.
Oh, it should say, actually, if you look at to the left of the green audio bar on QuickTime.
Oh.
Does it say 1?
Yeah, 103.
Okay, 103. Okay, good. So we're kind of reaching the end here.
Right.
This has been very fun.
Remember, I didn't turn mine off the way
you didn't turn yours off, so I figured you had the canonical time.
That's the canonical time.
Yeah, mine says 42 something. So so they'll have to splice mine together, and then I'm always creating problems for them inadvertently. So, can you give us a preview of what might appear next on Cocktail Party Physics, or some ideas you're thinking about?
I've actually got a couple posts in progress. Artificial retinas, a little thing on robotics, LiDAR. I actually want to do a post on LiDAR because I find it kind of interesting.
On what?
LiDAR.
LiDAR?
Yeah, it's basically an imaging technology using interferometry. It's very interesting.
You mean like they like with the Keck telescope?
No, it's a little different, but it's basically it was used in 9/11 to kind of like basically to map out the wreckage and figure out where the bodies might be and that sort of thing. That's the grimmer aspect of it. But it can also be used for archaeological work. If you're flying over and something's buried in dense forest, you can use the LiDAR to scan the area, and the image that comes back, you'll be able to see darker spots and whatever that would be indications that there's, say, a ruin there.
Oh, I see.
It's a great technology, and that's probably going to be a post coming up.
Oh.
And then I will be covering the Industrial Physics Forum in October in Seattle, and that'll be very interesting. I will be blogging that for AIP.
Oh, well, that's great.
So, yeah.
Well, we will be watching.
No, thanks.
Okay. Well, say hi to Sean for me.
I will do that.
And I hope the wedding goes well, and maybe we can also read about that in Cocktail Party Physics.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how many. There'll be a few pictures up at least.
You're not going to blog from the wedding?
I don't think we're going to blog, but Mark Trodden, he's a co-blogger at Cosmic Variance, is going to perform the ceremony. He got ordained online and everything.
Oh, perfect. Perfect. You won't get married online, though. That would be
we got an email from him basically saying, "Yours in Christ."
Okay, Jennifer, it's been great.
All right, great.
Okay, you can press the off button now.
Okay, great.
Okay, bye.
Bye.